Okay, guys, so we're going to take our last set of notes that you're going to need for your plate tectonic book. And even though we know that the entire Earth's surface is broken into plates and that these plates move on top of convection currents that occur in the asthenosphere, we're going to talk about the directions, what they move, what they're called, and what crystal features can result from them. So if you look at the red arrows, the three ways the plates can move is they can either slide horizontally past each other, slide away from each other, or move towards each other. So if you notice, if you look at a map of the crustal features, you can see that the plates are always constantly moving, and they actually move about 1 to 2 inches per year. So it is so slow that we don't even feel it. So let's talk about the first type of boundary, which is convergent. Convergent, as you can see from the arrows, are when two plates are moving towards each other. So the definition of convergent is when two plates push together. This is represented by a compression force. And I know we haven't gotten into forces yet, and you will after Christmas, but imagine that you're putting your hands on either side of a spring. When you're pushing them together, you're trying to push your hands together, that is a compression force. So that's the force that's involved when these two plates move towards each other. Now remember, there are two types of crust, continental and oceanic. So because of that, there are three different types of convergent boundaries. So you need to know all three types and what crystal features each one makes. So the first one is continental. So obviously this is when two big, thick chunks of continental crust collide. And what happens, like if you take your fingertips and you're moving them towards each other and you keep pushing them, they're going to go up, creating mountain ranges. So a mountain range is the crustal feature that is formed from a continental convergent collision. It's a lot of C's. The second one is continental and oceanic. Notice as you have the big, thick continental crust with a thin oceanic, it can create an ocean trench. And the reason for this is because that thin oceanic crust, even though it is thin, it's a lot denser, it's actually going to push and go underneath the continental crust. This is what we call the subduction zone. And it is going to push down, and that hole where that oceanic crease goes into the other kind of creates this little V shape. That is what is called a trench. And then the last one is oceanic. And this is when two thin, thick oceanic crusts collide. Again, one is going to get pushed down under the other, but you don't really know which one. But it's still going to create a subduction zone. And eventually, what happens is all that mantle, that rock that gets pushed down, it's really hot in the mantle. So it starts to heat up, melt, and eventually it will make volcanoes. And volcanoes will, once they break the water's surface, become islands. All right, let's talk about divergent. Well, just like the movie, when things move away from each other, divergent means to push apart. If you look at the arrows, you can see that they're moving away. If you look at the force, this is actually represented by a stretching or a tension force. And the way I like to help y'all remember it is think about it. If your parents get a divorce, they move away from each other and it causes a lot of tension in the family. So the two types that it can make, because this does happen with continental, is it creates rift valleys. The greatest example of a rift valley would be the Great Rift Valley of Africa, and also Iceland is a rift valley. So because the two continental plates are separating away from each other, it breaks and falls down to create this valley. Now, there isn't an example on Earth that happens to occur with continental oceanic, so we can skip that and then go into oceanic. This is where most of the divergent happens, is at the bottom of the ocean floor. And this is what we talked about with seafloor spreading. So as these two oceanic plates move away from each other, that hot magma is going to rise up, hit that cold ocean water, and harden into new oceanic crust. And we call this crustal feature the mid-ocean ridge. So again, divergent is when they move away, and it's a rift valley and a ridge, the R's, rift valley and ridge. And the last type of boundary is when they slide horizontally past each other. This is called transform. So if you'll look at the arrows, they're sliding past. This causes the force is a lot of friction. Take two hands and you're moving them back and forth, back and forth. It heats up. That is friction. Now, there really isn't a crustal feature, but it has more of a cause and effect. When these two plates are sliding past each other, sometimes they will get stuck because rocks are not smooth. And the pressure will build and build and build. And when finally they break free, that release of pressure is called an earthquake. And this always happens at faults. And a fault is the boundary between two tectonic plates. Okay? So, summary, you have mountains, trenches, volcanoes, island arcs, which are all from convergent. That's the one that's the hardest to remember because there's three different types. Divergent, which is only continental, continental, and oceanic, oceanic, and those are the R's, right? Rift Valley and ridges. And then transform, which is earthquakes. And again, this earthquake can happen at the bottom of the ocean floor and on continental. So it really is the same, even though there's an X here. So if we look at pictures, they're moving away, divergent. This is a ridge because it's obviously oceanic crust. So yes, there's volcanic activity. Convergent, notice how these two crusts are the same size. So this must be oceanic convergent, making a trench. Now notice right here how this crust is getting pushed down. This is what is called the subduction zone. So you might want to draw this and label this as the subduction zone. And then transform is when they're sliding past each other, and that is where earthquakes can be caused. Here's a picture kind of showing all the movements that are happening at once. Again, because these two oceanic crusts are colliding, you have this subduction zone, which all this crust down here is going to melt and turn into magma, which will heat up and make volcanoes. And then once they break the water surface, they're island arcs. That subduction zone right above it, that V, see this little V right here? That is a trench, and trenches only occur during convergent. You have it where the two plates are moving apart, and because it's happening at the bottom of the ocean, it is a ridge. And when you have continental and oceanic crust, again, subduction zone, which is going to create volcanoes. And then when you have two plates sliding past each other, earthquakes. Okay? Here are some videos if you want to go look at these. I'm also going to put a site up, a website that's going to be really good for you to go through and look at. It has great digital pictures. But tomorrow, y'all are going to be going over, or actually the next 3 days in your plate tectonic book, convergent, divergent, and transform. All right, so if you need to, pause the video. Make sure you got good notes and good pictures.